Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is a story about what if Deku was done fighting part 1. If you guys enjoy this what if and want to see part 2, comment down below and let me know before I start. Please do support for more awesome content and leave a like, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel and also share this video with your friends and check out the description in my playlist. The author of the story under 𝐒𝐻𝐼𝐴. So let's start the video. Death is something that scares most people. A great unknown mystery to all. People fear what they do not understand. That is true in cases all across the board. Society strives to answer these unknowns and quiet the unanswerable. Fear controls people. It drives one to the extremes. The people who control that fear, though, they have control. Those who control the fear control the ones influenced under it. Fear's a tricky thing. Fear always follows the unknown, the mysteries. When the world started to drastically change, fear followed it. The evolution of quirks brought fear and confusion that divided society. People with the newborn powers, or quirks, were shunned and called monsters. Human rights advocates quickly calmed the rising storm. But the hate was only shifted. The 80% of society that inevitably evolved to have quirks began to degrade the remaining 20% that lacked the new ability. The new minority was dubbed quirkless. People considered to be the bottom of the barrel, useless. Given the dirty jobs no one else wanted, they were pushed to the back of society and discriminated for something completely out of their control. This new sense of power turned society into a judgmental media, even more so than before. From this, the era of villains rose, and with it, the era of heroes. People aiming for justice congregated on both sides. Ones looking for power climbed the ranks. Each side had their pillar, their source of power and strength. All Might, the beacon of hope, the greatest good, the symbol of peace, and known by all. All for one, All Might's eternal enemy, worst of the worst, mastermind who leads the leaders from the shadows but only known by few. Meet Izuku Midoriya. At the age of 2, he and his parents were caught in a villain bombing. His father was killed and his mother was disabled. Baby Izuku was lucky to survive. His legs were mangled and destroyed from the initial blast as well as the fire that followed. But since Izuku was so small, a medical, underground hero was able to heal his legs. 𝐒𝐽𝐾o, Izuku's mother, was beyond grateful. After losing her husband, she wasn't ready to lose Izuku, too. In the end, All Might had arrived and cleaned everything up. His speed created strong winds that extinguished the fires in a flash. He stopped any more damage from happening. But he was given too much credit. Not everyone was saved as they made people believe. The Midoriyas continued on with their lives. They were given support from the government since 𝐒𝐽𝐾o was unable to work. But it was nowhere near enough. Family friends helped when they could, but they could only do so much. They managed to scrape by, though. It was rough, but the two were happy. Izuku was full of energy and hoping to become a hero. He wanted to help his mother as well as everyone else. With his quirk, he was going to rid the world of all evil. His days were filled with running around his house playing the hero with a makeshift cape on his back. Izuku believed things could only get better from there. However, things didn't get any better. Instead, it was quite the opposite. Because of all the damage Izuku's legs had sustained in the bombing, they couldn't be for sure if Izuku had the extra toe joint that signified a quirkless person. But after Izuku turned 6 and still lacked a quirk, they assumed he was quirkless like his mother. And that changed everything. He couldn't become a hero. He couldn't save people. He couldn't help mom. He couldn't do anything. He was turned into an outcast, just useless and quirkless. For the next 7 years, Izuku was bullied and beaten over and over again for the one thing he couldn't control. His once childhood friend, Katsuki Bakugo, was the source of most of his pain. But the word friend became even more foreign to Izuku the longer he was just the quirkless loser. It hurt Izuku even more, knowing that he had once been best friends with his bully. He still admired him and tried to rekindle their friendship. Katsuki didn't like that. It only backfired in the end. Right before his 13th birthday, Izuku's mother fell deathly ill. Being quirkless and disabled, the hospital didn't try very hard to save her. Izuku couldn't pay for life support when the sickness overtook 𝐒𝐽𝐾o. He was devastated. Now he wasn't just a poor, quirkless loser, he was an orphan as well. The only person holding up his life was too ripped from underneath him. He couldn't even afford a proper funeral. Just a cheap headstone. Sitting at the head of 𝐒𝐭𝐲 headstone, Izuku Midoriya lost it. He cried for hours on end. His mom was his everything. And now, she was nothing. Now a little over 13, Izuku had finally broke. That's how we get to where we are now. Shoeless and hopeless, Izuku Midoriya stood with his feet hanging off the edge of a building. This is where he used to go to watch the stars with Kaken, or who we formerly know as Katsuki Bakugo. The view gave him a feeling of nostalgia and yearning. He yearned for how it used to be, just laughing and enjoying the stars. But he knew that would never happen. Things would never change back to the days he loved as a child. It just wasn't possible. So he placed his feet on the side of the building. Gripping the ledge, he took a deep breath, pushed off, and jumped. Death was a mystery to Izuku, but for some reason he didn't feel any fear. The wind swirling around him, he felt as if he was flying. He felt free. He knew this was the end. Heroes saved people, but not people like him. No one had stopped him. No one was there to talk him off the ledge. No one would come to save him before he hit the ground either. No one was there for him. Not Kaken. Not his mother. Not some hero. Not anyone. No one cared. He was alone. Nearing the ground, Izuku wasn't filled with fear but with relief. This was for the best. He was just a waste of space, useless. It was better if he died. Well, at least that's what they told him. He was just some random quirkless. Right before he hit the ground, Izuku looked up at the stars for what he thought was his last time. He would soon be with his mother again and rid of the cruel, cruel world. With a smile on his face, he hit the ground. The stars twinkled brightly above him, and then they didn't. If what the world we lived in was hell on earth, then death was a gift. A gift from the gods that would allow one to go to heaven. But the gods never liked Izuku. If death was a gift, then life was a curse. A curse that he couldn't get rid of. Stuck in an endless loop of life. Midoriya woke up to see the stars looking down on him. He gazed up and wondered why they were still there. They stopped sparkling for him, yet they were still there. He loved the stars, but at the moment he didn't want them to be there. That means he lived. And he wasn't supposed to be alive. He chose death, but the Reaper wasn't ready for him. In his PRD of glaring at the shining stars, a strong scent caused him to shoot his attention to his surroundings. Grass and dew were not the smells that came from the center of a city. His hand he shot down to steady himself in an upright position was met with the cold grass of the night. It caused him to flinch at the sudden feeling. So there really was grass here. But where was here? Raising his head, his eyes were met with an unbelievable sight. Spreading across in front of him like a sea were thousands of flowers. Trees lined the horizon, and he thought that maybe he did make it to heaven after all. Filled with anticipation, Izuku got up and started walking. Excited, made his way down the hill he was currently on. He was really for what was next. But his legs weren't. After a few steps, Izuku's knees buckled under his weight. Tumbling down the hill into the flowers, his vision was blurred with a rainbow of colors. During his short fall, he painfully became aware that this wasn't heaven or a dream. The new pain in his hip and the many, many scratches that covered his legs proved that. He was pretty sure that you weren't supposed to bleed in heaven. Izuku quickly reached the bottom of the short hill. He got up realizing his hand was wet. Looking to his right, he found a small pond. He crawled closer and started to try and washed off all dirt and BLD that was smeared on his arms and legs. This is when he became aware that he wasn't wearing what he was before his failed jump. He was in a casual outfit he often wore at his house. His situation was becoming more and more confusing every moment. On his knees, Izuku reached his hands down for some more water when he stopped. His head snapped behind him, but there was no one there. He swears he just saw a pair of yellow eyes looking at him in the water. Was it just his imagination? Turning back to the pond, he flinched. They were still there, but this time they were connected to a head of yellow hair. Leaning forward, there was no mistaking it. That yellow hair and those glowing yellow eyes belonged to him. They were his. Izuku Midoriya wasn't ever one for cursing, but there was only one thing going through his head: what the F? After an unhealthy amount of hyperventilating, crying and panicking, Izuku finally managed to grasp the situation. Well, as much as he could. He was, after all, in the middle of a forest and flower field after jumping off a building to commit suicide and somehow teleported and changed his clothes and his natural hair and eye color. This was totally normal. Just splendid. Not even Izuku's analytic mind could wrap his head around this. It's okay, the now yellow, small bean said to absolutely no one but his reflection. With a shaking breath, he continued to stare straight at his reflection like it would help him somehow. Midoriya's eyes started to burn after a minute, so he closed them and let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. He ran his hand through his, once green and for some reason now yellow hair. Dropping his hand back to the ground, Izuku did the only thing he felt he could do. Talk to himself. It's just fine. You aren't insane. It's okay. It'll be okay. The sound of Izuku's mumbling filled the area. He opened his eyes again, feeling better. Just fine. Everything's just holy sht. My hair is black and my eyes are red. And how the hell and why and what is happening to me? Yes. He started hyperventilating and panicking and crying again. It just wasn't a good day for him. In fact, he wasn't even supposed to be here. He should have been with his mother by now. It was a while before Izuku finally accepted that his hair was changing colors as well as his eyes. But there needed to be an explanation for this. There was always an answer, but he just needed to find it. Izuku Midoriya might have been quirkless, but he was as smart as they came. Where he was lacking in the quirk department, he made up for in his intelligence. He had studied quirks and everything about them for as long as he could remember. He had studied quirks, quirks, oh my god. Izuku didn't know why he hadn't thought of it before. Right as he woke up he should have realized it. No one survives a fall from that height. No normal person. No quirkless person. He, Izuku Midoriya, wasn't a normal person. He was part of the 80% of society that evolved to have superhuman qualities. Izuku Midoriya had a quirk. He had a quirk, and he just used it. Albeit he didn't quite know what it was, but it was still there. He could do it now. He could be a hero. Did he really want to be a hero? Did he really want to fall in line with the society that made his life a living hell? Did he really want to be part of the society that let his mother die because she didn't meet certain conditions? Did he really want to be part of the people that turned their back the minority? Did he really want to become what he hated the most? He didn't want to be part of any of that. If that was normal, he was fine with being a freak. He was one anyways. There was no reason for him to start trying to be normal, now. At that moment, Izuku Midoriya found a new sense of determination well up inside of him. He was going to take this cursed life of his and make it into a gift for others. The heroes didn't save people who were like Izuku. He was proof of that. So who was going to be there for them? He was. If he had to suffer the burdens of the world, he would make for damned sure that no one else felt like he did. He'd make the best out of this mess. Under his watch, his people wouldn't have to suffer as he did. So apparently he had a quirk. Izuku Midoriya wasn't the quirkless loser they all believed him to be. Even he thought he was quirkless. But that was until he woke up in a forest after jumping off a building in different clothes and with color-changing hair and eyes. I mean, it isn't impossible that someone just swept his should-be-dead body off the ground in an alley and just happened to know what he had always worn, had changed his clothes, then dropped him off in the middle of nowhere, and had someone use their quirk to keep changing his hair and eye color just to mess with him. Yeah, no. No one would spend that much time on him, let alone have enough information on him to complete those tasks. He was a nobody. Not really worth the trouble. There is always the possibility that he was under some form of illusion, but his wounds felt way too real for that to be true. Him having a quirk was the only option that made sense to him. It isn't like they ever confirmed that he didn't have a quirk, they just assumed so. With his mother quirkless, it wouldn't have been odd. And it wasn't like he was physically dying at any point of the day for him to figure his quirk out. Maybe mentally dying but not physically. The details of his quirk weren't there, so Izuku would have to find that himself. How he was going to do that he didn't know. Like, he could always just try dying again. What's the worst that could happen? He wanted to die anyway, so it really couldn't go wrong. Izuku was fine with dying as well as with surviving. He had things to do. He knew his mother would understand if she had to wait a little longer to see him. 𝐒𝐭𝐲 was always a patient woman. She was great like that. Now, he just had to kill himself. Midoriya was fine with pain. His tolerance went up since he decided to keep close to 𝐭𝐽. He was almost numb to it. Too many broken bones and severe burns did that to you. It raised his pain tolerance as well as his amount of scars. If he ever let his mother see them all, he believed she would have a heart attack on the spot. His mother loved him too much for her own good. Since he sat there for so long, it was already light outside. He could now see that a bunch of rocks and stones littered the area. Picking up 2 rocks at the edge of the pond, Izuku hit them together as hard as he could. As he expected, one of the rocks cracked in half. Using one half of the broken rock, he steadied his breath and plunged it into his neck. It hurt like hell, but the sensation was short. When Izuku opened his eyes, he was back. In the city. In an unknown alley, he decided that since he was here, he did indeed have a quirk. It seemed to change his location when he died. It also allowed his hair and eyes to change color. With odd curiosity, he wanted to know what he looked like now. Stopping in the road next to a newspaper stand, he looked into a store window. Instead of looking at the merchandise, he was staring at his reflection. With dark blue hair and caramel-colored eyes, Midoriya was liking his new look. It would never be better than his original green, but it definitely wasn't the worst. Glancing to his side, his attention was brought to the newspaper stand he stopped by. Picking up a random magazine, he started flipping through the pages lazily. He tensed when he came to a section dedicated to the quirkless. The last article was about a quirkless boy who had just recently jumped off a roof. A family friend identified the body as the one and only Izuku Midoriya. Apparently, his past bodies didn't disappear when he died. And 𝐭𝐽 had found him on his way home from school. Mistuki, Katsuki's mother, had confirmed that it was indeed him. His funeral was going to be held tomorrow, much to the same extent as his mother's. Snapping back to reality, Izuku decided that it was best he makes a fake identification for himself. The place he landed on being the best place to start was his house. Getting there would be a pain, but he'd work it out. As much as it pained him, he believed presenting it as a break-in was best. If the Bakugas found his stuff missing, they'd have questions. Izuku followed through with his plan. He trashed the place and took very few things and put them in his backpack. Money, some clothes, first aid kit, and a couple of pictures. I hurt him to see his house in a state of disaster like that, but it wasn't his home anymore. It stopped being his home when his mom died. Now it was just 4 walls and a roof. He tried not to cry when he thought of his mother and her appealing smile, but he still wasn't over coping. It was less than a month ago that she was still alive. He couldn't even spend his 13th birthday with her before she died. It was just too soon. His birthday was spent at her grave. He hoped she knew how much he missed her. Izuku had a feeling his mother knew. She was amazing like that. Always knew what was on his mind before he knew himself. Izuku had tried not to cry, but he ended up bawling his eyes out anyways. Trying to remove himself from all the side glances and weird looks, he ended up sitting in the back of an alleyway. Not the most ideal place to break down. It was away from the masses, so it was good enough for him. Izuku Midoriya didn't expect anyone to find him. If they heard him, there was no reason for them to investigate. Either way, he really didn't expect to hear someone addressing him in the middle of his episode. At first, he thought he had imagined it. But then it came again. Trying his best to calm himself, Izuku slowly started to stop shaking. Raising his head from his knees, he used the sleeve of the sweatshirt he changed into to wipe his tear-covered face. He was addressed once more, making his head turn to the voice. Both people flinched when the teary, caramel-orange eyes met the worried, chocolate-brown ones. Offering a weak smile, Izuku looked up at the girl staring at him. Her gaze softened when she saw the boy's tear-stained face. Matching her eye color, the girl's hair bobbed up and down when she leaned down and offered her hand. Izuku reached up and took it. Turning his head to the side to avoid her gaze, he rubbed the back of his head. Hi. I'm sorry you had to see that, Izuku chuckled weakly. He was too embarrassed to meet her eyes but tried anyway. He was glad to find that she didn't look disgusted. Returning the boy's gaze, the girl gave her own smile back but with more enthusiasm. I heard you from the street and wanted to find out if you were okay, she said with a sweet voice. It's nice to meet you. I'm 𝐒𝐭𝐲 𝐒𝐭𝐲. She seemed nice enough. But Izuku realized that he completely forgot to make up a name for himself. He was, after all, supposed to be dead. Just something simple that she can't question. Anything really would work. Nice to meet you, Uraraka-san. I'm 𝐒𝐻𝐢𝐳. Well, that wasn't very simple, but it'd work. Phoenix Recovery, 𝐔𝐬𝐬𝐾 the now, 𝐒𝐻𝐢𝐳, studied the girl. Uraraka had soft features and a round face. Her hair was a chocolate brown, matching her eyes. She had on a local middle school uniform and carried a school bag with her. Kaioi did guess it was that time of day already. Students were just getting out of school. But he didn't know what to do. They introduced themselves, but what now? It was nice of her to check up on him, but what was her plan of action? It's not like they really knew each other. Apparently, Uraraka had already had an idea in mind. I know this is sudden and I don't really know you, but it seems like you could use a pick-me-up. So would you like to join me? I'm heading towards the park to chill for a while and wouldn't mind you tagging along. She offered a hesitant smile, but it was enough for Kaioi. Kaioi brightened up considerably and slowly nodded. That'd be nice. Thank you. His immediate response lifted the girl's mood. She nodded and subconsciously grabbed his hand and started dragging him away out of the alley. He let out a squeak that the girl didn't hear or chose to ignore. He let himself be helplessly dragged away, barely keeping up. By the time they got to the park, Kaifuku was out of breath. Smart as he wasn't in shape. Uraraka led them to the swings in the corner of the playground and sat down in one. Kaifuku followed her lead and sat in the one next to her. They sat there in silence, enjoying each other's company. They didn't say much of anything to each other the whole time they sat there. It was nice nonetheless. When Uraraka ended up having to leave, the goodbyes were short and quick. Not having anywhere to live at the moment, Kaifuku just stayed on the swings as he watched Ochako leave. He appreciated that she didn't press the matter of why he was crying. He honestly didn't want to talk about it. It was weighing heavily on his mind. Back to the thought of what he was going to do with his life. He wanted to liberate the oppressed people, his people, but knew that he couldn't do it as a hero. That just wouldn't work. Being a vigilante would always be an option, but they were too hidden. If he wanted to make an impact, he would need money. And to get that, he would have to steal. It wasn't right, but money didn't grow on trees. He'd decided. A villain it would be, then. But Izuku would be a different kind of villain. No, not Izuku. Izuku Midoriya was dead. He was 𝐒𝐻𝐢𝐳 now. He'd be a villain with a purpose, not like those other fools. He'd plan carefully and choose his targets with caution. The pointless killing was stupid to him as well as killing the innocent. He would make it so people didn't have to turn to villainy for survival like he knows some must do. He'd help those who called for help but never got their answer. Before this, when he was still blinded by heroism, Izuku couldn't understand why someone would be a villain. What the point was. Kaifuku, though, now understood that not all villains were the same and that some only became villains because they were pushed so hard, they snapped. There, of course, were still sickos out there, but he now knew not to put all of them into the same category. And he, for one, was not going to be in that category. After letting his thoughts drift, Kaioi finally found how tired he was. But again, he didn't have any residence. Walking to the bad side of town, he eventually found a little, abandoned cafe. It was small and cute and just the right size. It was definitely run down with age and wear. It was still in decent shape despite all that. With just a little elbow grease, it'd be as good as new. Deciding that project was for another day, Kaioi laid his backpack on the ground and used it as a pillow. The closest thing to a blanket was his sweatshirt that he was just going to keep on. The fatigue taking over him, he swiftly fell asleep. As the sun rose, the light filtered through the boarded-up windows. The air was cool in the morning and the area was quiet. The creatures of the night retreated to the shadows as the new day awakened. Stretching as the sun covered him in warmth, Izuku thought back on what had happened. His mother died. Then he died. But then he wasn't dead. And then died again. But still wasn't dead. Hair color and eye color were unstable, which he hadn't thought could be a thing. He changed his name to 𝐒𝐬𝐽𝐽. He'd make sure to remember that. Oh, and he decided on becoming a villain. Great. Welcome back, Killer Headache. But setting that aside, he had things to do. One of those being fixing his current situation. Living situation, to be exact. Walking out into the street again, 𝐒𝐽𝐽 was looking for a target to hit. He was looking for some drunk loser who was having his morning hangover. They were easy targets. Passing by a stumbling drunk man, 𝐒𝐽𝐽 lowered his head and slowly walked past. Making sure not to disturb him, 𝐒𝐽𝐽 slipped his hand into the man's coat pocket, pulling out a fat wallet. Looking through it, there was enough cash to last him a bit. Pulling out a few bills, Kaifuku stopped by a small convenience store. Grabbing anything he thought was necessary, he quickly made his way to the register and bought the items. He mostly bought cleaning supplies for his new mess of a project. He had said he would do it later, and that later had come. Shortly, he arrived back at what was going to be his new home. Looking at it in the light now, there were more problems than he saw last night. Not wanting to have to find another place, he'd have to put in the extra work. Groaning extremely loudly, internally and externally, 𝐒𝐽𝐽 dove right in and got started. By the time 𝐒𝐽𝐽 was done with cleaning everything, the sun was already setting again. The inside of the old cafe was shining and reeking of bleach. He had somehow managed to make the place homey. Where there once stood small round tables and chairs, now stood comfy lounge chairs he had found and fixed from around the area. People these days threw things away for such trivial matters. 𝐒𝐽𝐽 had found the chairs in front of a dump for simply having a few holes in them. Like, did people not know how to sew? The area of a dump where things went before being smashed and processed was where Kaifuku got most of his current furniture. There was a dresser that was thrown away for missing a drawer that he had quickly taken. The hardest part of this process was honestly just transportation. Hauling all his finding from there to his little rundown cafe was pretty hard. It was especially hard for someone like 𝐒𝐽𝐽 who had little to no muscle mass. Other than all of that, cleaning was just busy work. He had repaired the floors and fixed the ceiling. The walls were wood, so 𝐒𝐽𝐽 bought some stain and restained the walls. The cafe counter was in surprisingly good shape, so that wasn't very hard. He had just added some tall stools that made it look kind of like a bar. A few hours of his time was spent toiling at fixing a broken generator. He needed it for electricity, so there was no avoiding it. After a couple of breakdowns from both 𝐒𝐽𝐽 and the machine, the roaring of the gears finally came to life. He quickly turned it off, however, when broken wires all over the house started to spark. Because he was so smart, he already had a grasp on electric wiring. Why he knew that stuff was a mystery to him, but he decided it was from all his random studying after finding out he was quirkless. What can he say? Studying was just how he coped with things. In the back area, the damage was less than to be expected. There were minimal repairs that had to be made. Fixing the plumbing into something somewhat usable was the hardest task. 𝐒𝐽𝐽's new room was simple and made from one of the smaller back rooms of the cafe. It had a worn desk, the dresser from before, a tiny cabinet, and a pillow and hammock for him to sleep in. He didn't feel the need to have a bed when the hammock would work just fine. All the other rooms were just cleaned and emptied. The kitchen area from the cafe was relatively small for the place. It didn't really matter to 𝐒𝐽𝐽. It had everything he needed, and that was enough for him: fridge, sink, stove, microwave, and oven. The room had a few cabinets he'd use, but just simple overall. His new home was finally complete. Using a large portion of the rest of his money, 𝐒𝐽𝐽 went to get himself a costume. Now deciding to go down the villain path, he needed a disguise and costume. Going to many different places, 𝐒𝐽𝐽 had gathered everything he needed for his new identity. Izuku Midoriya was always seen as a bunny or a rabbit. But he wasn't him anymore. Izuku Midoriya was dead. And he had killed him. He was the fox that killed the rabbit. 𝐒𝐽𝐽 was now a fox, the fox. He'd make a name for himself or not. He just wanted the people who would know him to know what he stood for. And he'd make that happen. His color was always green, but now, it was orange. His suit was a bodysuit that was deep, dark red lined with orange. Red-lined orange fingerless gloves covered his hands while his feet were just covered in by his suit and some bandage wrap. He believed that the shoes could be traceable and were too heavy for rooftop chases and getting the F out of whatever CRP he would be getting himself into. Other than that, the suit only had some orange accents here or there. Well, that's besides his tail. Every fox has one. It was the same bright orange of the rest of his accents. Attached to his suit was his hood that had a second layer that doubled as his mask. It would cover everything below his nose with fabric, allowing him to breathe. Atop his hood were two ears that slightly resemble those of a fox. It was just what he was going for. The mask covered enough of his face that allowed him to draw whiskers and paint the area around the nose white. When he drew a small nose into the white area, it looked like he had a snout. For him, this was a perfect costume. He was definitely recognizable as a fox. The fox of Japan. And there isn't a villain who isn't armed. And he was armed. Well, as much as you expect him to be. He really didn't have the biggest budget at the moment. 𝐒𝐽 had found a weapons dealer after following a guy he ran into who was loaded. The dealer was polite despite their job. She was actually really young. Still older than 𝐒𝐽 but still in her teens. She was nice but kept it all business. Or tried. Izuku Midoriya had his effect on most people, and 𝐒𝐽 Kaifuku was no different. He ended up getting her name but no more. The name was Miyako Katnai. And when 𝐒𝐽 tried at his first time flirting, she had to inform him she was a lesbian. The amount of embarrassment he felt was real. Besides all the shenanigans, the transaction went smoothly. With the promise of only using her as his supplier, he got his purchase dirt cheap. Happy with the deal, he left with a reinforced bow, double katanas, a WHP and arm and leg clasps that would give him more protection. The WHP was compactable as well as the bow, so he could keep them with him at all times. And when folded, the bow could become a staff-like weapon or into a short dagger. It was perfect. The arrows he had were extremely thin but strong, great for speed and accuracy. All of those things he kept with him in a complimentary pouch he got from his purchase. It wasn't that bulky, so no one would suspect anything. And just like that, 𝐒𝐽 was ready for his first running as a villain. His first mark would be small. Just testing out the waters. He was going to hit a jewelry store that was rumored for its rare stones but with no supplier. And this screamed mighty suspicious to him. Businessmen get away with too much. From slavery to blackmail, they are a different kind of evil. They pay their way to the top and use their money to stay up there. Heroes are like that too. Endeavor. With his background, he would have been knocked off his pedestal way before. But he can pay the press to keep things quiet. He uses his influence to cover up the bad things. It sickened him. And again, we can how alike villains and heroes can actually be. This is why his first hit would be a businessman. He owned a fashion line that wasn't too popular but wasn't unknown either. 𝐒𝐽 was specifically going to target his jewelry line first. Hopefully, that would bring some attention to him. Both him and the businessman. Then he can only hope that someone would investigate the crook and take him down. If not, he'd just do it himself. There was a problem with that, though. 𝐒𝐽 might have had the tools for the art of being a villain, but he had no idea how to properly use his katanas and WHP. And his aim was crappy. He had terrible foot coordination. And even if he could use the WHP or katanas properly, his arms weren't strong enough to wield them for long. But he already knew this. He knew this when he went to buy his equipment. But he was 𝐒𝐽 Kaifuku. And 𝐒𝐽 Kaifuku had a plan. It was simple really. All he had to do was build some muscles and practice some techniques. But doing all that would take some time. At the moment he had no muscle definition. Like a stiff rag doll. Yeah, he was a nerdy, stiff rag doll. He thought it'd sound cooler. Either way, he needed to change. If he was taking all this time to build up his strength, then he might as well not waste it. 𝐒𝐽 couldn't train 24/7, so when he's resting, he could gather information. He already knew quite a bit about the underworld, but he had barely scratched the surface yet. Information was powerful and could make or break an operation. The more he knew, the better. This was new territory for him, so he had to be careful. If he knew anything, Though, it was where to find the information. You couldn't just go asking around. That was a very quick way to get you killed. You had to know who to ask and where to ask it. No one would tell you. You just had to know. Luckily, he knew where to start. Burnt Bloom. A club, bar, meet-up and gathering for all those who were in the game, and all those who were out and watching. A known villain sanctuary and gathering that was infamous for its popularity with the higher-ranked figures in the underworld. But that's just the thing that had it so well known. So many villains of all kinds gathered there. But it had never been found. Heroes searched and searched for the club but always came out empty-handed. It was a mystery. 𝐒𝐲𝐽 knew as good as anybody that Burnt Bloom wasn't the name went by on the outside. It was just the name for the people who knew. Camouflaged in the many red districts across Japan, the Burnt Bloom could be anywhere. Well, not anywhere. It was somewhere. Right near him actually. Right under society's noses. It looked just like your ordinary tailor shop. And it almost was. You could get suits made and fitted there, but what most people didn't know that is where you could get your custom villain suits. Someone had to make them right. On top of villain outerwear, there was the actual club below the property. It wasn't easy to get into as you would expect. You just had to know the password, but the password was that there was no password. If your password fit what they wanted, you would get in. But if it was wrong, you just simply died. The main reason that the place had never been found. And how did 𝐒𝐲𝐽 come across this again? Well, he was really just looking for a place to get his villain costume and stumbled across the place. He had watched Shigekari Tamura in a very bad disguise walk into the back room and not come out. Seconds after he disappeared, a man with a briefcase went to the same room. Peeking into the room, he didn't see the two anywhere. Then the dots clicked, and when observing with a few stakeouts, his suspicions were confirmed. Way too many went in and didn't come back through the front entrance. He only knew since the same people would enter many times but never exit. This place had to be special, and he would use it to its fullest. 2 weeks had gone by and 𝐒𝐲𝐽's training was going smoothly. Slowly but surely. Strength training was nice, however, it was time for his other training that would probably get him killed. But if he could pull it off, it'd take him leaps and bounds. People at Burnt Bloom were smart and calculating. They didn't let some people inside if they didn't feel like they were in it good. Delinquents always showed up once in a while claiming that they were in for a change. But they knew better than to let them in. Those kids would turn back in a week and spill all their secrets. Not very good for their type of place they were running. They would always just play dumb. And it always worked. Knowing his own appearance, 𝐒𝐲𝐽 knew he was never going to be let in. He looked like a runaway that didn't know how to rebel. He was lanky and needed a haircut. No way were they going to take him seriously. Just to get past those bodyguards. The bodyguards who had a weakness. A girl weakness. Walking to the back room where he saw countless people vanish, he gracefully glided in his heels. Removing the lollipop from his mouth, he knocked on the back that seemed bolted shut. His hair was long enough to look like a girl's with the right touches. A white rose clip held together his half ponytail. A black, leather jacket was hanging off his shoulders. His white 𝐒𝐴𝐴 top showed too much skin than he would like, but too much skin was what he was going for. It was stripped with a dark blue, closely resembling his hair. When the door opened, she simply gazed at the burly man standing in front of her and said, "Yes, Beaches," with the sassiest and most sarcastic tone he could muster, minding to keep his voice higher and squeakier. The man seemed pleased as he eyed her. Satisfied, he stepped to the side. Walking by, the one thing 𝐒𝐲𝐽 was thinking about was the unnatural air he felt between his legs. It matched his outfit at least, black, leather. It took all he had not to tug at the skirt that was covering his legs as he walked straight into the lion's den. When Nangaka got up, he was dreading going to work. He had a peculiar job. Well, you couldn't even call it a job. He was more like a SLV or a hostage. And he hated it. He hated it. The Burnt Bloom was bustling as usual. Entitled people mixed with villains and blended in perfectly well. See, what was not known about the Burnt Bloom was that it was a calling for anyone of the underworld's power. Sly businessmen with enough on their names to get sent to death row 6 times overdrank while talking in slurred words with women on either side. Hitmen and assassins and bounty hunters and contracted killers alike gathered and mingled about, exchanging information, looking for suppliers, hunting marks, and partying after their kills. You'd even see a few brokers. Either way, the place was a melting pot of the wicked. But you wouldn't be able to tell just by looking. It was your average club with the same foul stench of alcohol and smoke with the slight lingering smell of BLD. All in all, it was just your normal shithole. But Nangaka's life was anything but normal. Even in this strange quirk-filled world, he had quite an undesirable life. His quirk was rare and put a high price on his head. It was a self-healing quirk that had very few limits. Anyone he touched couldn't die while he was touching them. It wouldn't heal them, but they would be in a suspended animation-type state. You think his talents would be needed in a hospital, but that wasn't where he was. Not in the least. This has definitely not a hospital. Hospitals smelled of bleach and chemicals. This was way more toxic. Last time he checked, alcohol and sweat were the last things you should be smelling in a hospital. But wait, he wasn't in a hospital. Nangaka was in this godforsaken club. Again, the place was toxic and the people were touchy. Not that he could do anything about that. People like him did attract attention. The tight clothes, exposed skin, flashy jewelry, high heels. People like that attracted attention. People like Nangaka. People like 𝐒𝐲𝐽. Nangaka stared at 𝐒𝐲𝐽. He wondered who the new girl was. He hadn't ever seen her in there before. He was worried. She looked like an easy target. Nagisa. Stop spacing out like a ditz and get your flat butt over here. That was his cue. See, at the club, he wasn't Nangaka but Nagisa. The boss didn't like being seen with a wimpy errand boy, so he was made to look like a chick. His physique was more feminine and had a higher-pitched voice. The boss told him that if he had to drag him around, he could at least make him look good in the process. Showing off all his women was one way the boss liked to show off. Nangaka honestly liked Nagisa better. Everyone did. Nagisa hurried up and headed towards their area. It was sectioned off for the business people of the underworld. The area was full of drunk people and lingering gazes. The place made him uncomfortable. 𝐒𝐲𝐽 had no idea what he was going to do now. He was in the lion's den dressed as a sheep with no plan. The only plan he had was to find information about the underground business world. He would take any information that he could and he'd be happy with it. Taking a deep breath, he donned his new persona, Zika. He didn't really know why he had chosen the name. Someone had come up to him and asked his name, so he, of course, panicked. He blurted the first thing that came to his head, which was Zika. He guessed it was good enough. Since he wanted information on businessmen, he headed toward the section that looked like it held all the manipulating scum. Drunk men hung onto women while they poured them more alcohol. He really didn't want to go over there, but this is what he had come for. 𝐒𝐲𝐽 chose a seat at the bar that was close to the closed-off section. He got something light and pretended to drink it. Not wanting to get drunk and lose his sense about him, he mostly just moved the glass around. Sitting there waiting, he was hoping to catch the attention of someone. Nagisa was the first one to notice the girl at the bar. She was the one she had seen before. He was worried. She looked just like the kind of girl his boss would pick up. And he was right. The moment the boss followed Nagisa's gaze, he liked what he saw. Almost instantly getting up, he stalked over to the blue-haired girl. She was petite and looked easy. Fidgeting the way she did, he could tell that it was one of her first times here. Pity started to swell in Nagisa's chest. The poor girl's just another victim of the boss. But the feeling forming fell away in an instant. They connected eyes and something unspoken passed between the two. A mutual understanding of their situations. Nagisa blinked and looked over the girl as she walked back to her with the boss. She walked in a way that reminded him of himself. Same thing with her speech and physique. It was feminine like his. It was fake like his. But it made sense. Why else would someone come to the burnt bloom? Information. So what's your name, little missy? Boss slurred at the new girl. Nagisa saw her shiver slightly but put on an impressively fake smile. I'm Zika. A pleasure to meet you. This made the boss grin. What had she gotten herself into? What in the hell did 𝐒𝐲𝐽 get himself into? This guy is a mega creepy perv. This other girl was also eyeing him weirdly. Right now, he didn't really know what to do. This was a bad idea. Oh God, he should have thought this through more. He was too focused on getting in that he forgot to figure out what to do once he got inside. What if someone figures out he's not a girl? What will he do? What if 𝐒𝐬𝐽's, or 𝐒𝐺's, internal panicking was cut off by a bunch of screaming? The place shook with an explosion. People screamed as more things exploded. A fight. Fights didn't happen here. Only on rare occasions did people fight. But on those few occasions, it was always a bloodbath. A punch started a domino effect. Soon, everyone would be fighting. The burnt bloom always had to move locations after a fight since the police and heroes always found them with the commotion. It was a ticking time bomb. You were either fighting for your life or fleeing the scene before the place was raided. 𝐒𝐬𝐽 was going for the latter. In his new panic, he didn't know what to do. But someone else did. Nagisa felt 𝐒𝐽𝐽's panic and instinctively grabbed her wrist, pulling her towards an exit. After running a few hallways, they were outside in an alley. Nagisa ran behind a dumpster and found the backpack he had hidden there. As 𝐒𝐽𝐽 slowly approached him, a bunch of clothes was launched in his face. Get changed, Nagisa hushed while starting to strip himself. Seeing Nagisa start to strip, 𝐒𝐬𝐽 started to panic. His hands flew to his face flustered. This made Nagisa pause. Silence enveloped them before he nursed of laughing. 𝐒𝐬𝐽 looked at Nagisa confused as he calmed himself down. It's okay. I'm a guy too. This made 𝐒𝐽𝐽 sigh in relief for a moment. Oh, I was 𝐎𝐽𝐽. He stopped mid-sentence to stare at Nagisa. Wait a minute. He scrunched his eyebrows in confusion. Wait, how did you know I was a guy? You 𝐻𝐽𝐽. Wait, you're a guy too. Nagisa faced the flustered 𝐒𝐽𝐽 and simply stated, takes a trap to know a trap. You could almost see the gears moving in 𝐒𝐽𝐽's head. Emotions flashed across his face, eyebrows furrowing as he thought. 𝐒𝐽𝐽 was silent. He opened his mouth just to shut it without saying a word, only to open it again. Nagisa decided to ignore it all for now. Seeing that it wasn't really sinking in at the moment, he brushed it aside for another time. 𝐒𝐽𝐽'd panic later about it. And he definitely would later when he'd recall the memory. 𝐒𝐽𝐽's jumbled thoughts were paused when a more pressing matter seemed to stop everything. He looked back onto what had just happened and decided he had a right to ask. He was confused and needed an explanation. Nagisa at least owed him that much. Why did you help me? Nagisa shrugged nonchalantly. He honestly wasn't quite sure of the answer himself. I was planning on trying to ditch boss at some point, and you just seemed like a good opportunity to do so. But let's not talk now. We need to get away from here, like now. At this, he grabbed 𝐒𝐽𝐽's hand and started running again. When they started moving, 𝐒𝐽𝐽 unintentionally let out a small, high-pitched squeak that reminded them of a small, startled creature. The fast pace made him stumble, making him trip multiple times and raising the chances of him completely wiping out and face-planting. While trying not to fall, 𝐒𝐽𝐽 acted almost instinctively, pulling them both to a stop as he dug his heels into the ground. Nagisa almost fell himself from the sudden change in speeds. Not like he forgot he had a passenger he forcefully dragged along for his high-speed ride of, let's drag you around everywhere by your arm and not give you a choice. His thoughts made him wince a little for the boy behind him. Nagisa slowly turned around and waited for him to catch his breath. So then, let's talk. They reached their destination, which was an abandoned park near the edge of the forest. Night fell upon them as 𝐒𝐽𝐽 and Nagisa talked to each other. The air was chilling as Nagisa finished up. But neither boy shivered. This was serious. Nagisa had acted stupid and irrationally. 𝐒𝐽𝐽 wasn't going to let it slide. Now it was his turn to talk. So you are named Nangaka, or preferably Nagisa, who works under this boss dude as a crossdresser that gets used and manipulated by him cause of your quirk that allows you to heal yourself with like no limits and put people in a suspended animation type state. And so you basically needed a way to ditch this boss who was, in simple terms, an asshat with control issues that makes money off tricking, blackmailing, and enslaving children, including yourself, so you used my sorry but excuse for a villain as an escape route because you were just done with that SHT and felt the need to trust a complete stranger in a club who cross-dressed as well, And did a terrible at it to begin with, mind you. Just for the chance that I wasn't some weirdo or creep and actually a person you could trust to help you out with your situation and not someone who would turn you back into your boss and make everything worse while not even thinking about any negative outcomes that were all very likely to occur. But you, of course, didn't think while making this decision, so now we are here after you dragged me, a complete stranger from a villain club, mind you, to a deserted park just for you to pale very drastically after you realized what SHT you got yourself into, and after that said stranger had to utterly and completely point out all your mistakes to you in the most blunt way possible, and to also make you realize that trying to team with me was a bad idea cause I don't ever shut up cause I have it. Horrible case of muttering and a tendency to forgetting to breath during those times, just like now because I've been talking way too long. So the question now is, when was the last time I breathed 𝐒𝐻𝐸𝐽𝐻𝐸𝐽𝐻 pass outright, so please see 𝐒𝐬𝐴 breathe very heavily, don't laugh and be extreme coughing and inhaling teas cause you're dry gasping, not cough off the hook cough, since this is a inhale lecture cough, you idiot. Commence 𝐒𝐻𝐸𝐽𝐻 gasping for air like a fish out of water for forgetting to breathe again and paying for it. Nagisa didn't know if he should laugh, cry, thank 𝐒𝐻𝐸𝐽𝐻, break down, or just die right there. The latter didn't sound like the worst thing ever. He doubted 𝐒𝐻𝐸𝐽𝐻 would notice his absence while the boy was knelt on the ground trying to remember how to breathe and not choke on air. It was sad. They were a sight for sore eyes. He just went for the former. The sudden outburst of laughter halted 𝐒𝐻𝐸𝐽𝐻's breakdown on the ground. His breathing steadied before he looked up at Nagisa and started bursting out laughing too. Neither knew why they were really laughing. This was a serious situation. They had just finished talking about how sucky of a life Nagisa had. But as they say, laughter is contagious. When the two finally got their act together, they quietly sat next to each other. They found peace in the silence and basked in the comfort of knowing that they just had one more person on their reason. Nagisa and 𝐒𝐻𝐸𝐽𝐻 both knew that they didn't need words. Each other's presence was enough for the both of them. They didn't know why, but they just had the feeling that one sitting next to them was a friend, not a foe. They hadn't done enough to gain each other's trust, yet they still seemed to put trust in the other. There wasn't as much logic to it as there was instinct. It was a feeling. Their gut told them that they were both there to stay. And this silent understanding that they now finally had someone to lean on lifted an immense weight off both their shoulders. After being alone for what felt like an eternity, they could soon come to understand something that would be their driving force in the future. Yes, some people will put you down and hurt you, but there is always a person there to pick you up and help you heal, even if you haven't met them yet. You are never alone. With this new knowledge and comfort, both Nagisa and 𝐒𝐻𝐸𝐽𝐻 would fall asleep under the stars. And in what felt like forever, the boys slept peacefully through the silent night, void of unease and nightmares. Nagisa felt something brush his legs. He didn't register it until he heard a meow. Slowly opening his eyes, his gaze was met with a curious one. A cat was sitting on his chest. It was silent around him. The sun hadn't risen, yet there was still a gentle light in the sky. Nagisa smiled to himself. It was peaceful. 𝐒𝐻𝐸𝐽𝐻 sat up with a start. Had he really carelessly fallen asleep? His mind was running with all the scenarios that could have gotten him killed or worse. But he soon calmed down when he realized that he was at an abandoned park at the edge of a forest. The bustling streets of the city were somewhere in the distance. The place where all the people were was far enough away from him. However, he couldn't stop this feeling of unease. A laugh of amusement found a way to 𝐒𝐻𝐸𝐻's ears. He'd almost forgotten about the presence next to him. Looking to his side with amused eyes, he watched as Nagisa was getting familiar with a cat. It cute thing definitely wasn't there last night. It seemed to take a fondness of Nagisa. It rubbed against his side, purring in delight. The cat's tail kept brushing against the boy's face, making him laugh. Did you adopt it or something? The two boys made eye contact. Neither knew what to do. They carelessly fell asleep next to each other last night after having a heartfelt conversation about why their lives sucked. She's a she, and I don't own her. But I have dubbed her Aqua. 𝐒𝐻𝐸𝐻's eyebrows shot up at the name. Aqua. For a cat. Are you sure? He narrowed his eyes at the overly happy boy. Aqua is perfect for her, Nagisa exclaimed while holding the calico cat up in the air. Her eyes are this appealing sea green. Just like flowing water. The cat seemed to almost nod in approval. Knowing his mind would never change, 𝐒𝐲𝐽 left Nagisa to his antics. He let out a heavy sigh. If only life was always like this. Whatever. You can take her with us, 𝐒𝐲𝐽 said. With an exasperated sigh. Take her? Where are we going? To say Nagisa was surprised last night was an understatement. He did not have any idea of what a mom this person was going to be. The rant of last night still rung in his head. In all honesty, though, he did act a bit irrationally. But it was nice to know that someone cared. For as long as he could remember, Nagisa was always alone. Now he had a friend. And that was a miracle in its own sense. To my place. I am right to assume that you don't have a place to stay. Okay, cool. We can talk there. And maybe take a shower. I don't know about you, but I feel disgusting. He didn't even give Nagisa a chance to talk. 𝐒𝐲𝐽 just continued to walk forward. Confident Nagisa was right behind him. Their stroll was peaceful and silent. The day was dreary, but the boys' spirits weren't down. In no time, all three of them had made it to 𝐒𝐲𝐽's temporary base of operations. And Nagisa had to say, this place wasn't half bad. Yes, it looked like a tornado came through here, but it survived that tornado. Welcome to my humble abode. 𝐒𝐲𝐽 exclaimed as he dramatically spun around. Pride was just radiating off of him. Fixed it all up myself. Nagisa raised his eyebrow. He turned to his side and poked the door that let out a nasty creaking sound. I can tell. He snickered behind Aqua as he held the cat up as a defense. 𝐒𝐲𝐽 reached over the cat and flicked Nagisa between his eyes. Ow, Nagisa rubbed his forehead. He sighed as he set Aqua down and made himself comfortable. The squeaky old couch wasn't half bad. The cat nestled in beside Nagisa while 𝐒𝐲𝐽 took the beanbag off to the side. They relaxed and played some Uno. The cat ended up getting scared by all the yelling and hid under the couch. But overall, it was a good day filled with games as both boys got to know each other. 𝐒𝐲𝐽 brought out some snacks and they both indulged in the junk food. But both of them had the same feeling settling in the back of their minds. This was the last time they'd be able to relax in a while. The sun set and rose once again. And with the sun, two boys rose with the dawn. One with messy blue curls yawned and stretched like a cat. The calico cat mimicked the boy, yawning, stretching and laying back down. Moving was overrated. The last house occupant wasn't as great with the morning. The sun shined into the pink-haired boy's eyes. He grunted and then fell off the couch with a loud thump. He landed face down but seemed in no hurry to move. Dust rose from the impact and filled the air. The cat then proceeded to sit on top of the boy, almost like she was claiming him. It was quite funny, and the curly-haired boy couldn't help but laugh. Shut it, 𝐒𝐲𝐽. Nagisa's voice was muffled as his face was smushed into the floor, but you could still hear his annoyance. You know that would sound more intimidating if there wasn't a cat sitting on top of you. Silence enveloped them again. But this air held a sense of seriousness. 𝐒𝐲𝐽 narrowed his eyes and glared at nothing in particular. What are you fighting for? He looked at Nagisa. What are we fighting for? Nagisa paused at the question. What was he fighting for? He thought and could only think of one answer. I fight for today. I fight for today, so there's a tomorrow. All right then. That's good for me. 𝐒𝐲𝐽 clapped his hands together. Today will be the day we begin whatever we're starting. Everything needs a starting point, so let today be the day. Come on, guys. We still got 2 more miles. After that day, both Nagisa and 𝐒𝐲𝐽 started training their bodies. And it was a hell of a training regiment. They only had 2 years to fix their bodies up. 𝐒𝐲𝐽 started running again with Nagisa. They were training every day to get their bodies into shape. They both pushed themselves to their limits. Right now, they were running towards one goal. They were going to go to UA. In about 2 years they were going to take the entrance exam and hopefully get into the hero course. But you may ask why. Why are 2 unofficial villains trying to get into UA? The answer is simple really, connections. If they were going to be working on the other side of heroes, they needed to know what they were going up against. It would also give them some formal training. They would be in school with some of the future heroes as well as some current heroes teaching them. It was a perfect way to get information. While it was risky, they knew they'd have to be careful. They were about 2 weeks into their training. In the mornings, both of them would run about 5 miles. They had started at 3 miles but bumped it up a week in. What part of the body they worked on would depend on the day. Their work was showing but not very much. Not yet. Nagisa and 𝐒𝐲𝐽 stopped at a park, 5 miles finally completed. Both collapsed on a bench, sweat going everywhere. 𝐒𝐲𝐽 hadn't run this much in his life before. Nagisa was no different. They chugged some water before getting up again. The sun was barely in the sky. It was about 6 o'clock. Even though it was so early, the heat still seemed unbearable. Let's go get some breakfast. Nagisa nodded in agreement before following 𝐒𝐲𝐽 to a small cafe. They sat down at a table and ordered some bagels. So how long do we have to do this? Nagisa said, exasperated. 𝐒𝐲𝐽 just laughed in response. About 2 more years. Both boys sighed defeated. 2 years seemed like a really long time. But the time would fly by faster than they thought. So how long have we been doing this? 𝐒𝐲𝐽 ducked under Nagisa's high kick. He was referring to the amount of time they had been training. I don't know. Nagisa parried 𝐒𝐲𝐽's punch and countered with a kick to his back. I think a year. 𝐒𝐲𝐽 stumbled forward from the kick and somersaulted back onto his feet. He turned around just in time to dodge another kick from Nagisa. You see, over the year, both boys found their own fighting styles. Nagisa had stronger legs and therefore had a fighting style more based around this lower body. 𝐒𝐲𝐽 was more flexible. He would use high mobility to get the upper hand. This had allowed him to win almost every time. 𝐒𝐲𝐽 leaned backward, narrowly missing Nagisa's foot. The kick made the pink-haired boy lose his footing. 𝐒𝐲𝐽 took advantage of this and tripped the other boy. Before Nagisa knew it, he was pinned down underneath 𝐒𝐲𝐽. He had lost again. They sparred like this every other day. It was how they tracked their progress. They were good, but they had to be better. There was only less than a year before the UA entrance exams. It was getting late, so they started to head back to their house. The place was much improved from the year before. They had gradually worked on it until it was actually decent. It was a place they could call their own. The way back wasn't long, but they somehow managed to run into trouble. What is the point of mugging people who have nothing on them? That's all the two could think at the moment. Neither of them had anything on them besides their water bottles. They were tired and sore and not in the mood to deal with these people. Could they not just home in peace? They tired walking past the thugs, but that, of course, didn't work. Nagisa shoved one guy to the side only to be thrown down by another. Where do you think you're going? 𝐒𝐲𝐽 was getting fed up with this all. Home, you jackass. Is there something you need? This seemed to just piss them off more. That was to be expected. Why, you little adash? Nagisa decided to stop that guy right there with a kick to the face. He didn't appreciate being thrown around. He had enough of that in his life already. His kick sent the man straight into the ground. Karma, beach. And a full-on brawl broke out. 𝐒𝐲𝐽 and Nagisa easily won. The thugs were burly and slow. The boys' smaller statures allowed them to easily outmaneuver through the random punches and lunges. Who's there? State your names. 𝐻𝐻𝐿 peeked over his shoulder to see the underground hero, Eraserhead. They'd been too careless. Run. Nagisa sprinted on the word. Neither needed to be on record. If they had a record, heroes would keep an eye out for them. And they would need to find a way to explain why 𝐒𝐲𝐽 wasn't in any files they had. Eraserhead was on patrol when he noticed a scuffle in the streets. He recognized a group of thieves that were spotted in the area. He didn't recognize the 2 other figures, though. They looked young, but he couldn't exactly tell. He watched as the figures took out everyone else. One prominently used their legs, and the others seemed to dodge and counterattack more. In no time, they were the only ones still standing. He jumped down from the building and tried to approach them. Who's there? State your names. They froze. Their backs were facing him, so he couldn't see their faces. But he could tell that the one was male and both were definitely young. The one closest to him turned his head slowly. The pro-hero's eyes were met with an annoyed stare. His dry eyes connected to orange ones that lit up with recognition. So they recognized him. That was a first. The boy muttered something under his breath. Almost instantaneously, both of the figures sprinted off into an alleyway. They were gone before the underground hero could mutter another word. He tried following them, but he quickly lost sight of them. Eraserhead turned his attention to the unconscious men around him. A sigh escaped past his lips. This was going to be a lot of paperwork. He just wondered who those kids were. The run-in with Eraserhead was unexpected, but it was quickly news of the past. Before they knew it, the UA entrance exams were weeks away. Their hard work was going to pay off. During all their training, Nagisa and Kaioi never forgot what they were working towards. Over the year, they had dabbled a little bit in the underground. Information gathering was key. Kaioi and Nagisa had enough dirt on some businessmen to send them to prison 6 times over. His goal to take down a businessman as his first act still stood. But now he was trained and prepared, and he had 2 specific men in mind. Or should he say, man and woman? But the woman is for later. Their current target was the man, or a son of a beach. See here. The first target was Nagisa's old boss. They found out that his real name was Tyosen Tokima. He had been running an illegal firearms trade in the underworld for generations. The worst part, it was based on child LBR. Forced child LBR. It works like this. He sells the guns to clients who use them for malicious things like murder. If one of these clients end up running into a for some reason newly orphaned child, they might bring the said child in as a means of staying in good graces or selling a contract. It's sicker than it sounds. And Nagisa was sold to this 𝐵𝑠RD. He wasn't kidnapped like most of the kids there. His sadistic parents sold him off for money. But he had it easy. He never had to feel the pain of having the love ripped away like a disposable band-aid. If there's no love to begin with, there's nothing to take away. Many others weren't as fortunate. If you could even call any of their situations fortunate. Kids had their families slaughter in front of them just to be denied the right to follow them. Instead, they are made to work day in and day out. They couldn't cry. There wasn't any time to. Nagisa was also different in that way. He wasn't put to LBR. He was the boss's safety policy. It was his job to make sure he didn't die. He was also stuck on babysitting duty too. Nagisa was almost a mother to most of the children there. He was the only one they could cry to. They would cling to him and he'd get attached. But they kept disappearing. It was driving him insane. Every day, he regrets leaving. He regrets leaving them all behind. He was their anchor, and he left. But he just couldn't stand to see another one of them in a body bag or worse. So Nagisa made a promise to himself. He would go back and rescue them all. He just didn't have the power to then. But he has the power now, and he would fulfill his promise. With Kaioi by his side, they'd be a villain's villain and turn the underworld on its head. The law of society didn't help those kids, so they'd become the law that would. You ready, Nagisa? Kaioi was waiting outside their house. They were going to do one last scout of the Tokima estate. All the children were kept there under tight security. Nagisa didn't like that the kids had to stay there another week, but Kaioi convinced him that they needed to make sure that their plan was secure. They would only get one chance at this. And there was no room for error. Failure wasn't an option for them or the children. They made it there by foot. Kaioi had cat and eye, his arms dealer, get Nagisa some gear. His suit was the same as Kaioi's, but it was brown-lined in purple. Nagisa's weapons included gloves with built-in razor claws and a bow staff. Kaioi had more weapons only because of his lack of an offensive quirk. Both decided against shoes. They were too loud and weighed them down. Their reconnaissance mission was successful. All information was checked over again. Their facts were straight, and their plan was clear. The next time they set foot on that property, they weren't leaving without saving some children and killing a 𝐵𝑠RD. And after that, they'd go for Kaioi's original target, a corrupt jewelry company. But that was for then. They still had problems to deal with. The rescue mission was scheduled for the incoming week. But before that, they had an entrance ceremony to take. They weren't too worried about passing. Unless there were some extreme prodigies, then they'd be fine. Through the past months, Nagisa and Kaioi were working their asses off. But it paid off. Now, they were heading to the UA entrance exams and, hopefully, on their way to UA itself. It was the day of the exam before they could blink. Both walked down the street in silence, fidgeting with anxiety. Nagisa wasn't nervous about the entrance exam, no. He was anxious about what would happen 2 days after that. In 2 days, they would conduct their rescue mission. He would be going back to the place he had recently escaped. Nagisa was nervous. What was he going to say to the kids when he saw them again? Would they hate him? Did they even remember him? Over the past few days, 𝐒𝐲𝐽 had been reassuring the pink-haired boy that everything would be fine, and he had to say it helped. He just couldn't help but feel nervous. 𝐒𝐲𝐽, on the other hand, was nervous for a completely different reason. He had let go of his past, but it still haunted him. Bakugo was trying to get into UA, right? Would he see Bakugo? Would Bakugo recognize him? He knew the chances were very slim. It just felt like his cover would be blown the moment he saw someone from his past life. No one has recognized him. His hair was dark blue and his eyes a deep caramel. 𝐒𝐲𝐽 just hoped it was enough. Clad in casual clothes, Nagisa and 𝐒𝐲𝐽 stood in front of UA. The place was way bigger up close. Giving each other nods of reassurance, they stepped foot into a new chapter in their life. How bad could it be? Bakugo Katsuki is an enigma. He claims he wants to be a hero, yet he has anger issues and releases his anger out on others. He cannot control his feelings. It's like his emotions are bottled up but constantly burst out. Bakugo couldn't express his feelings right. And he knows that all too well. One of his childhood friends was quirkless. They grew up together and they went everywhere together. But then he got his quirk. And Izuku didn't. Izuku Midoriya was quirkless and they couldn't do anything about it. But that idiot still wanted to be a hero. Katsuki couldn't understand how he could still hold so tight onto that pointless dream. There was no way a quirkless wimp like him could become a hero. He'd just die trying. But that Deku couldn't get it through his thick skull of his that he couldn't be a hero. He just kept on pushing forward. Katsuki just wanted him to quit. But he just wouldn't. But then he went too far one day. Izuku didn't come to school the next day. He didn't think much about it at first. But then a day became a week. No one really noticed the quirkless boy's absence, but it was starting to make Katsuki uneasy. Where was he? He got his answer. It was the weekend. Katsuki Bakugo was storming around his neighborhood. His hag of a mother had made go out for milk. He may or may not have accidentally exploded the carton. Or not accidentally. But that's not the point. He was around the area where he and Deku used to hang out when they were smaller. It would have been nostalgic if Bakugo wasn't such an but deep down he cared, a little bit. And that part of him worked without him knowing. Subconsciously, his feet lead him to a very familiar street. Katsuki kicked a rock and looked around. This was where he and Deku would go to look at the stars. There weren't very many factories around the area, so the sky was clear of most of the smog of the city. But that was then. Things weren't carefree like that anymore. Katsuki growled and glared at the sun beating down on him. He picked up a rock that was smooth like a skipping rock. He didn't know why, but he was pissed. He threw the rock hard to his side and it skipped on the sidewalk before it shot into an alleyway next to him. Stalking forward, he was about to head home, but his steps faltered. The rock sounded like it hit something. It didn't sound like a dumpster or any garbage he knew. It hit something with a slapping sound. Like it hit a person. And he would know. Throwing things at people was like a hobby of his. He probably just imagined it. Katsuki was on edge and paranoid. It was just his imagination messing with him. That had to be it. But there was a sinking feeling in his stomach. Something in the back of his mind kept prodding at something. This whole day he felt uneasy. Maybe Katsuki got too much F-sun. But that didn't explain the pit in his stomach that just kept on growing and growing. He kept telling himself to keep walking, but he kept hesitating. Something was holding him back. Nothing was there, and he needed to walk away. But what if it's not nothing but something? As much as he wanted to deny it, he knew his gut was never wrong. It wasn't a matter of if something was there. It was that question of what was in that goddamned alley. Growling, a very irritated Bakugo stormed towards the alley prepared to blow anything and everything up. But nothing, could prepare him for what awaited him around the corner. The moment Katsuki entered the alley, he was hit with a wretched smell. It burned his nose and made him scrunch his eyebrows. He walked in further and his stomach turned at the sight. There was a body on the ground, still. He could see blood pooled around the head. The sound of buzzing filled his ears. A swarm of flies had already gathered around the corpse. Green tufts of hair poked out from behind a gray hoodie. The once soft, bouncy curls were sticking out in all directions, crusted with dried BLD laying flat on his back. Izuku's corpse smiled up at the sky. A gentle look of peace adorned his face. Without all the BLD, you could have believed he was a quiet nap, ready wake at any given moment. But Katsuki saw the BLD as clear as the day around him. It was the only thing he saw, and he couldn't look away. His breathing picked up as went into a state of shock. The truth was in front of him, but his mind couldn't take it. Deku. Katsuki stumbled forward. Deku, is that you? His mind went blank as he fell forward, kneeling beside the rotting corpse. The world seemed to go unnaturally silent. Come on. Wake up. Wake up. His body trembled as he shook the green-haired boy. Memories of his childhood, their childhood, flooded through his head. Kaken, you want to go to the park with me? We're playing heroes today. You're the villain I have to catch. Okay, Izuku. Whoa, Kaken. Your quirk's so cool. I can't wait till I get mine. Let's become the best heroes together, Kaken. Izuku, when you get your quirk, we'll be the #1 heroes ever. Nothing will stop us. 𝐒𝐻𝐻, Izuku was crying. I am 𝐒𝐻𝐻𝐿. I was never friends with a weakling like you. Guilt crashed into him like a bullet train. You're such a Deku. A pathetic quirkless could never even dream of being a hero. Why do you even try? No, shitty nerd. Don't even think of standing in my way. Just take a swan dive off a roof and hope for a quirk in your next life. No. Emotions Bakugo didn't know he had spilled out of him as he broke down. The nerd just had to back down. He'd never be a hero. That's all those words were supposed to do. How the F was he supposed to know his mother would die a week later? It wasn't his fault. He didn't mean for this to happen. I didn't you weren't I just, Katsuki choked over his words. He didn't care about the nerd. So why was he so worked up? He couldn't admit it, but he got used to Izuku following him around, always being there. But Katsuki hated him. So why? Just get up. It isn't funny anymore. Open your eyes, Dash. If he thought the boy was worthless. If we wanted him gone. If he bullied him relentlessly. If he really didn't care, why was he crying? Izuku. Katsuki looked up at the sky with watery eyes. The sun still taunted him. The day seemed too nice for this. There were no raindrops to hide his tears as they slowly fell. He didn't what hurt most. The fact that his childhood friend was dead. Or that he drove someone to death. Or the fact that he was the reason that the boy lying next to him jumped to his death because he was a D-head. And that no matter how many times he said it out loud, he never really wanted him dead. Katsuki's whole body shook as he sat there. It wasn't in the least bit cold, but he was shivering from head to toe. He didn't understand any of this. He couldn't understand himself. Katsuki told him to jump. So why wouldn't his mind accept that? The one time Izuku shouldn't have listened to Katsuki's bitching, Izuku took to the words and jumped. But why? Katsuki didn't even know what he was asking anymore, who he was asking. Trembling, all he did was sit next to his childhood friend and stare at the peaceful look on his face. Katsuki never came home with the milk Mitsuki asked for. She'd go out later to find him crying in an alleyway, a lifeless boy beside him. Calls would be made. The hours would be long and never ending, but the night a blur. A small article, barely a paragraph, would be written for the quirkless obituary. A tiny funeral was held. Izuku Midoriya was dead. Committed suicide at the age of 13 by jumping off of a building. Died on impact with the ground. Died and would never come back. And would haunt Katsuki Bakugo, never disappearing from the back of his mind. But he never knew that he'd be back again right under his nose. But he wouldn't know until it was too late for him.